G'day there guys, it's your host Markee and welcome back to another episode of r/revenge. I hope you enjoyed today's stories today. If you did, please tell me what you think about it down in the comments below. Smash that like button, sit back, relax and have a good time. Thank you. Posted by user The Leader Side. Titled, Mock My Mother's Death? I bankrupt you. So this could be a very, very long story. I'll try to summarize where and when I can. My now ex-wife Kate and I moved into an apartment in 2010. The house as a whole was a renovated townhouse, split between two sides with two apartments on the bottom and two apartments upstairs, addresses, ending in 126 to 128 accordingly. I wasn't the biggest fan of the apartment, as it was a much older building that I had ever lived in, but I quickly adjusted to the wood creaking throughout the night. On the initial walkthrough, we noticed that the only problem was that there was a dip in the bathroom ceiling. The landlord Jay promised us that he would get it fixed ASAP. 1 year to the day that we moved in, there was a loud crash at 4 a.m. The bathroom ceiling had collapsed and there was tiling and wood all over the floor and in the bathtub. Now, Kate was typically the aggressive one, while I was more passive and laid back, and she kept calling Jay throughout the day. When she got in touch with him at around 9 p.m., she explained what had happened and insisted that it be fixed immediately. Jay rebuffed, yelling that his girlfriend was a lawyer and he didn't need to do anything. Now this is where I got mad. I went outside to have a cigarette and call him myself. I feigned a relaxed demeanor, and at first he began trying to talk to me as a bro and kept saying, "Dude, I'm gonna get someone out there, but it's gonna take a few weeks." When he couldn't sway me that way, he began yelling about his girlfriend and her knowing the law. What he was unaware of was that I had read the tenant laws in my state, and so, as he tried to lie, I waited until he was finished, and I then recited the law stating that if an apartment was considered uninhabitable, then the landlord needed to pay for the tenant to stay in a place until it was resolved. Meaning he would have to pay for us to stay in a hotel of our choosing every night until the ceiling was fixed. He tried to say that our upstairs neighbor Phil was the super, but he wasn't sure if he could get him down there that night. He placed me on hold, then came back a few minutes later and said that Phil and his girlfriend were out of state. I rang Phil's doorbell and asked, with Jay on the speakerphone, if he was assigned as the super. He laughed and said, "No." Dejected, Jay said that he would have people out there the next day. Previously, he said that they were busy for at least 3 weeks. There is more to this incident, but it leads to two conclusions. 1. If you're going to lie, then there has to be a consistency in your lie. And make sure that the people you lie to don't communicate with each other. And 2. This is where a feud started between me and my Kate versus him and his mother. She was the original landlord and gave the house to him so he could begin to make a side profit. Fast forward to a year later. Jay stopped coming to the house and his mum began doing the pickups. Around this time, my ex and I had been laid off and we were working with Social Security for food, health and housing insurance. We were approved for all three in April, but we would not get the check until May. When our typical check wasn't in the landlord's mailbox, he immediately gave a summons, saying that he was taking us to court for eviction. The day we went to court, he had no lawyer, and, going before the judge, here is the summation, or rather, a non-verbatim account of how the case went. Judge says, "Does the defense have a means to pay within 90 days of non-payment?" And we say, "Yes, Your Honor," and hand over the paperwork, showing that he will be reimbursed for April and May. Judge says, "I see no problem. They are breaking no laws. Why are we here?" And Jay says, "Well, Your Honor, they have been bullying. I don't care. Unless they are breaking a law, then this case is dismissed." Suffice to say, Jay and his mother were not happy. Around this time in my life, things were tumultuous. My mother, who had been battling cancer for 4.5 years, succumbed to it in June. This happened at roughly the same time his mum came knocking, looking for payment. I explained that I would leave the check in the mailbox when we got back from the funeral home, and to please just respect my right to mourn. She took her fingers and began rubbing them together, pretending to play the world's smallest violin. I will never forget what she said next. "Oh, my mummy just died, woe is me." She probably had it coming. "I don't care if your entire family is dead, I want my money." She smiled smugly, proud with what she had just said. I saw red, and my heart jumped into my throat. I went, grabbed the check, and handed it to her in absolute shock that anyone would say something so screwed up. She had finally managed to push a button that very few people I've known throughout my life have gotten close to pressing. I went into rage mode, but not in the way that you would expect. The revenge. We were always told that if a health inspector came by to not open the door. I waited until August, since that was the month before the lease was going to run out, and we knew that they would not extend a renewal. I walked up the block to the town hall to ask for a health inspection of our property. It was scheduled for several days later. Now, it's important to know several things. 1. I was friends with all of the tenants. Phil had moved out with his fiancée, but the new tenant was a really cool girl around my age named Danny. Tom and Hannah on the other side of the downstairs floor had moved out in July, and Jay was still looking to fill it. The only one who wanted to stay out of this was Rose on the upper right apartment. 2. I had gotten permission and her spare key so I could let the inspector in Danny's apartment, and I knew that I could use the back stairs on the right side to let him in on Tom's now vacant apartment. And 3. I also knew that Danny was moving out in September, a month after Kate and myself. The inspector came and it was glorious. He checked the exterior of the house first, noting that wires were exposed. There was an old empty dryer, along with other odd clutter in the backyard. I brought him inside the shared entrance, and, as I was counting on, he noticed that the last inspection dated back to 1994, 18 years. This meant that for each year he did not have an inspection, there would be appropriate fines. For our apartment, we had black mold growing in our bathroom, and the bubble in the ceiling had begun to regrow to problematic proportions. Upstairs, Danny's apartment was suffering from leaks in the ceiling, and it looked like her bathroom ceiling was also on the brink of collapsing. We then went to the basement. The boiler was on the verge of exploding. There was flammable items, along with gasoline and a pack of matches, sitting right beside it. 2 things that I did not know was, 1. The fire door that separated the 2 sides did not close all the way, rendering it moot, and to be honest, I had never heard of a fire door until that day. And 2. On the right, 1 to 8 portion, basement side, there was a toilet that had blown up. It had coated the surrounding walls, and the leakage prevented us going up to the floor via the right side. The entire time the inspector was photographing and writing constantly. We stepped outside, and he said he needed to come back. When I asked why, he said he had run out of space to write down all of the infractions. He had filled the front and had written an entire page on the back portion. I kindly and coyly asked, "Well, how much will it cost right now?" He scratched his head and said, around 20 to 30k from what I can see, but it's probably going to be higher, as this house was never licensed to be split into apartments. I thanked him, and he was going to come back with the county inspector. We were gone when that took place, though I did ask him to send me a copy with a list of violations to my new address. So we moved out at the end of August, but I got the updates from Rose. Because he was the current owner, he owed all current fines, and no one new could move into the empty apartments until everything was up to code. Because 3 of the 4 were vacant, he was losing $4,500 in potential rent. He handed the property back to his mother and had to file for bankruptcy. Now, here's the other thing. Every time an old tenant left and a new one was coming in, an inspection was supposed to be done. Now that all of the financial burden fell onto her, they looked into the records, and she was fined for each time that she had broken that rule, $750 per. By the end of the year, Rose had moved out, so that place was hemorrhaging money. I sat back, proud of what I had done, and left it be. No, F that. I wasn't close to done yet. I felt like I had destroyed Jay, but my real target had always been his mum. I learned that she had 8 properties throughout 3 towns in my county. I went to each one, spoke to the tenants and said that I was a concerned tenant from another property and asked if they had any problems in their apartments. Every person I asked described the apartment in very poor to intolerable levels, and that the mum was effectively a slumlord. She would ignore problems unless someone turned to litigations. She was threatened that they would summon the inspector, or, more often than not, the people would move out. She would refuse their deposit and sink those into cosmetic repairs so that the apartment looked nicely furnished. People rarely fought back because she knew that the occupants were upper-lower class minorities. So, being the concerned person I was, I went to the inspector of the other 2 towns and asked for an inspection to be done with at least 1 tenant, if not more, and would be awaiting the inspector when they came. Turns out that she faced pretty much the same infractions on every apartment she owned. It turned out she actually had 12 apartments, but I initially only knew about the ones that fell within my county. The remaining properties in the next county over were given a mysterious heads up to perform a surprise inspection. From what I can tell, Jay's mum had been in the landlord business for about 35 to 40 years, and that collapsed quickly. Since we moved literally 1 block down the road from our old one, 54, I got to see Jay lose his primary source of income and have to claim bankruptcy, but also saw that his mother was also trying desperately to find a buyer for all of the apartments so she could pay off the fines. I learned 2 years later, in 2014, that she too had to file for bankruptcy. Jay and his mother camped out in front of our next apartment 2 days in October of 2013 before she filed for bankruptcy. I'm guessing that was to scream at me and or Kate. So I called the cops and said that there were strange people standing in a no parking zone and they kept looking up at the 2nd floor. A cruiser swung by and told them to leave. I know I should have used the 2 months I spent monitoring everything to find a new job, but this was the one and only time I wanted to cripple a person where they hurt the most, their wallets. I think I got my point across. None of this would have happened if you had just fudging fixed the ceiling before it collapsed, Jay. Edit. I did some editing for clarification purposes, but I wanted to thank you all. I never expected to have anything I posted get anything other than a few hundred likes. I'm especially grateful for those that gifted me awards. Thank you so much. I wanted to clear up a few things that people have frequently left comments about. 1. I was always taught to use wit versus physical confrontation. What she said to me was a sucker punch, and I was already in a state of shock from holding my mum's hand when she took her last breath, asked to write a eulogy, and create 2 memory boards. I was already on autopilot when she said what she did, and the way I reacted was more me disassociating than anything else. If it was after the ceremony, I may have punched her until she was unable to stand up, whereupon I would continue to pummel into her until someone pulled me off. She reminded me a lot of Professor Umbridge from Harry Potter, both in her mannerisms and attitude. 2. Why did I not go outside when they camped in front of my new address? Well, 2 reasons. The first one being that the full brunt of my revenge had not fully played out yet, and secondly, because I hoped that the cop would give her a ticket. If he did, it was a little bit less money she would have, and she would know that I was the one responsible. 3. Did they know it was me? Yes, they did. I called Jay for the deposit back after the 90 days were over. You need to allot the landlord 90 days to pay you. I knew he wasn't going to, though. When we left, I went around every room and took photos of every angle. I also had a friend, Justin, who did the same with his camera. Like a good tenant should, I also asked for the inspector to take photographs to show that we had caused no significant damage. When Jay told me that we had messed up the walls and the wood was warped, I responded with, "That's not what the inspector I called in said." He immediately hung up and blocked me. I lost the deposit, but it was still completely worth it. And 4, on an unrelated note, and on the much more petty side, before I moved out, I would go to the front lawn where he had put the sign saying that there was an open apartment, Tom and Hannah's, and put down his phone number. Each night, I would use a marker to change the last two numbers. The modification was noticeable if you walked by during the day, but since I had the same marker and color, then if you were driving by, you couldn't really tell. Every few days, the sign would be replaced, and by the next morning, the modified number would be back. Even once we left, Jay was still not taking the whole "cannot rent until building is up to code" seriously, and so he was still putting up the signs. Since I was still in vengeance mode and I lived on the same block, I began to not only change the number, but I also began printing out signs that read, "You do not want to live here. Trust me." Signed, your friendly neighborhood tenant. That lasted until he took down the sign for good around November? Posted by user AE2AW. Titled, "Hippity hoppity, this is no longer your property to manage." After graduating college, my girlfriend and I moved to a new state where she was accepted into an engineering program. We found a lovely garden apartment-style complex that advertised 100 megabyte per second internet speed, which was included in the price among a few other amenities. When we met the property manager, he seemed strict but well-mannered, nothing out of the ordinary, until we signed the lease. The first problem. Suddenly, walking into his office was not allowed without an appointment. I had to come by to ask a question. I saw him browsing social media and figured he was as available as he made himself to us when we first came by, unannounced, to view a model apartment. Nope. He refused to answer my question and asked me to make an appointment via email. The second problem. The terms of our lease included an attachment to complete within 48 hours of accepting the keys that details all discrepancies within the unit. We submitted the attachment via email around the 40th hour. The property manager responded that the terms recently changed from 48 to 24 hours, and since we had passed 24 hours, we would be held liable for all found damages. When citing our copy of the lease, which explicitly stated 48 hours, he informs us that we signed an outdated copy and would need to make an appointment to come by the office and sign a new lease. The third problem. The internet speed was not 100 megabytes per second as advertised. It was less than 15 megabytes per second off-peak and about 5 megabytes per second on-peak. We again contacted the property manager to complain, but we were referred to make an appointment. The fourth problem, we made an appointment to address the previous three problems. During this meeting, and after I finished voicing our issues, the property manager leans forward and says, "There are other communities in this neighborhood that may be more accepting of people like you and your girlfriend. You're welcome to break the lease and leave." People like you and your girlfriend. I had thought he was referencing our no-nonsense response to his nonsense. Daily communication, scheduling multiple meetings to address these issues, etc. But my girlfriend believed that he was speaking towards our skin colors. Her, a black woman, and myself, a white man. My girlfriend jokingly told me to check my privilege before getting serious and explaining to me that we were experiencing discrimination at the very least. The solution. I did some research and discovered the property manager worked for a larger organization that owned several complexes throughout the country. I found their director of human resources on LinkedIn and made a connection. I then emailed her copies of all email correspondence, screenshots of the lease, pictures of the internet speed flags advertised by the road, and more screenshots of online speed tests. We further noted this comment and the implications behind it. The Human Resources Director replied within a few hours and promised us she would look into the issue. About 2 days later, the property manager called and asked us to come by his office at our convenience. We showed up near the end of the day and sat down across from him. He then proceeded to ask us if we would be willing to write a letter stating we accepted his apology, despite not yet offering said apology. And in return, he would credit us a month's rent, accept our damages attachment, and promise to have the ISP on site within a week to assess the internet issues. We declined. He got personal with us and revealed his job may be at stake and asked us to reconsider. My girlfriend leaned forward and said, There are other communities in this neighborhood that may be more accepting of people like you. You're welcome to leave." The property manager was replaced in a week with a super sweet older woman who not only gave us all the things the original property manager had promised, the 1-month credits, accepting the damages attachment, then further scheduling maintenance to fix said damages, having the ISPSS and upgrade the internet to promised speeds, but she also made it clear her office was always open for anything we may need. I looked up the old property manager about a few months ago on LinkedIn. Still unemployed. Okay, and I think that's where we're going to end today's episode, guys. As always, I do hope you enjoyed it, and maybe even learned something from these stories. Just want to say a quick shout out to my Patreon subscribers and my channel members. You guys should be on the screen right now. If you do see yourself, I want you to give yourself a little pat on the back for being amazing and supporting me on this channel, this little journey we're going on the YouTubes. I really appreciate it, and you guys enabled me to do all this amazing work. So if you do see yourself, I love your face and I'm happy to see you. Also guys, if you want to pitch in your own support, you don't have to, but channel links are down in the description below to support the Patreon, the channel membership, whatever you want to do. It's kind of like tipping me if you feel like I'm doing a good job on this channel. I will be opening up avenues for content on those in the future. Just right now I'm kind of bogged down and stuck in Ireland, but you know, it is what it is. Anyway, guys, with that said, I do hope you have a wonderful day today. Whatever you're up to, I'd love to know down in the comments below. I do hope you have a good day, night, sleep. Whatever you're up to today, tell me, and I'll see you in the next episode, guys. Bye.